Is this the best WWE feud ever? It could very well be. It was an absolute beast that spanned multiple years, and the true joy and the madness was that Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels left the ring, and well, they started to kick off backstage. You can still find fans today who cite this falling out as the reason they also got into the dirt sheets, as they were called, and the intrigue was just too much. But now let's jump back to the 80s, because it all ties in. The brand of WWE was all bright lights cartoons with charisma up the wim-wham, and of course this was carried out by the likes of Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, and even Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who waved around a big stick. They managed to break through, and of course Hulk Hogan found the love of the mainstream crowd too. And if you can be bothered to travel back to this period using the internet, you will find it. Hulkamania was everywhere. Of course, no era lasts forever, and the golden age, as it was known, hit the bricks hard, mostly because of many scandals that got into the public eye. Pop culture itself had also started to change, and the WWF was way too late to realize that. They carried on with their over-the-top nature, and dare I say, they became a little bit passé. There was also the steroid trial, and you can say what you want about that, but that kind of press is not good press, and it soured a lot of people on the company. The World Wrestling Federation was meant to be good, wholesome family entertainment, and now it's anything but. Adults did not want their kids watching it. It meant Vince McMahon had to go into damage control because optics are everything. The first thing that had to go were the oversized comic book physiques. The entire operation needed a cleanup, and for a while, the answers came in hype with the likes of Diesel and just finding a sheer combination of mass and agility with the awesome Yokozuna. There were still asterisks, of course, because Kevin Nash would eventually leave WWF for WCW, so eventually, where did you go? It needed to be somebody that commanded respect, it needed to be someone that knew what they were doing, and it needed to be someone that was not problematic. Let's look at Bret Hart. This means we go back to August 29, 1984, when Bret debuts for WWF after Vince buys Stampede Wrestling. This was all part of the deal. As a sweetener to owner Stu Hart, McMahon promised that Bret, Davey Boy Smith, the Dynamite Kid, and Jim Neidhart would all be featured, no matter what. Bret also decides to use this to switch to his real name, because he wasn't entirely sure being called Buddy the Heartthrob was cutting it. The issue was the first show in New York is at the Broad Theatre, and that came around a point where Bret Hart's knee is still a little bit wrecked or injured, and he has written about this in his book. Because by the time he was teaming up with Dynamite Kid, the writing was on the wall. It was so bad, his partner started to yell at him mid-match, even though they did go on to beat Mike Sharp and Troy Alexander. Vince McMahon was also waiting for them backstage, and that didn't go well either. It was the first time meeting Vince, and while McMahon was like, "Oh my gosh, Dynamite Kid, you are so great, and you are so jacked," he kind of looked at Bret and said, "You need to go work out more. Welcome to the WWF." Amazingly, Shawn Michaels' first impression is even worse. That went down a few years later after, on the 3rd of June 1987, and yep, he's already won half of the Midnight Rockers, with him and tag team partner Marty Jannetty facing and beating Jose Estrada and Jimmy Jack Funk in a dark match. 2 days later though, they got fired, and I'm not kidding. Is the most ridiculous story if true, because after being accused of not knowing how to party, Michaels smashed a drink over his head. Surprise, surprise, word got back to Vince McMahon, who didn't like this. You can only get away with such behavior when you're a big star, not when you've just walked in the door. That was almost a lesson that Shawn Michaels would take to heart. Bret and Shawn don't meet in the ring themselves until September 11th, 1989, when the Rockers were rehired in 1988. They are now facing Hart and Jim Neidhart, who, as their name suggests, is the Hart Foundation. It goes down on primetime wrestling. If you watch it now, an eyebrow will go up, because even when Bret is getting ready to lock up with Marty Jannetty, he is looking at Shawn the whole time. Now, I'm sure he's just planting seeds for the future, but still, it speaks volumes now. Maybe Hart just realizes if he's going to get to the top, this would be a guy that would be competition. And of course, the match ends when the Rougeau brothers interfere. Because the truth is, my friends, wrestling has quite literally never changed. The feud continues and makes its way to Madison Square Garden, of all places, on November 25th, 1989. And look, the fans love it. It's a 20-minute draw, and while it's a bit long in the tooth by today's standards, it smashes everything else on the card, and the whole match is based around the idea of Bret and Shawn getting into it. Here we are again. You also see Bret boot Michaels right in the face, and Shawn sells that like he's dead, and you'd be well within your rights to think this was a stiff shot, but nope, Hart had timed it perfectly. Shawn is just the man. It's just more hints that no matter what else does go down, these two can most certainly work together. Dare I say, maybe they have a little bit of chemistry. Another year passes to February 11th, 1990, when the WWF finally decided to do the one-on-one. guess what happens? That's right, tag team partners Marty and Jim get involved, so nobody actually gets the win. It only goes 5 minutes. I mean, you can't do much with that, but like all the interactions, there are moments of brilliance. I mean, the atomic drop cell will make you laugh. You will think Michaels' groin has just exploded. Bret's also on the attack the whole time, and that just works. I'm going to use that word again. The chemistry is obvious once more, and it was all setting up a major tag contest on April 23rd, 1990, as the Harts and the Rockers had a proper war on Saturday night's main event. Given this was the early 90s and the standard was vastly different, they just decided to blow the roof off the place, with the main objective being wow the crowd and work like crazy people, given that main events at the time for the WWF were mostly slow and a little bit lumbering, so this stood out like a wonderful thumb. It's in warp speed. By this time, Hart is a full-on technician too, whereas Michaels has a tendency for the high-flying stuff, and it means that we get cross-body blocks and catching bodies right into pin attempts. I mean, the relentless back and forth is just so easy to watch, and the action is seamless. The double kip up by the Rockers after a double Russian leg sweep sums it up, and Vince McMahon is so obsessed with this nonsense. Even here, it does end in a double DQ, which is what nobody wanted, but what they do stays in people's heads. Without knowing it, they had started to help establish what the future of wrestling was going to be. This is doubly true given what we talked about at the start of this video. Change isn't just coming, it's going to be needed. I mean, many praised this as one of the best tag team matches to date in the WWF, so you would imagine that right after this, the Machine would have got behind Bret and Shawn. Nope. That's still not how it works. The October 30th, 1990 rematch has been inked into history because of the infamous Ghost title change. The Rockers do indeed defeat the Harts in a 2 out of 3 falls match for the Tag Team Championships, but it never happens according to the WWF record book. Now there's more lore here too, because people have said the top rope snapped clean off. That's actually not quite accurate. Like, it does break, leaving the teams to change plans on the fly, but it's not stopped because of this, because it's not being shown on TV. Maybe it was going to be. The rumor was Vince McMahon didn't think it was good enough to air due to the wreckage, so even though Michaels and Jannetty win those belts, it's simply ignored, so the next time you do see it, nothing has changed. Bret and Jim are still the champions. By March 30th, 1991, Vince has decided there was something to this Bret Hart guy as a single star. We weren't quite there yet. During a tour of Japan, a co-promoted show, WrestleFest, the two teams do smash it once more, and it is the same template, but because everybody involved understands the industry, they know they have to lay it in a little bit more in the East, therefore they do. It could also be the first time that Hart does that backbreaker that would become a staple. It's so damn impressive, it actually does make you think he broke his back. June 2nd, 1992 is a big day for Bret because he is now the Intercontinental Champion. This was after an all-timer with Mr. Perfect back at SummerSlam 1991, which you should all go and watch today, and he is being pushed. This isn't done for lols. It actually feels as if Vince McMahon has gone to Hart and told him the truth. We are going to do something with this. It does lead to a second television match between Bret and Shawn, and look, Hart is very much the babyface, and Michaels is very much the heel, and yet for some reason, Shawn seems more interested in what this means rather than getting his character across. So I suppose you could make the argument that he was just stumbling on it by this stage, and yes, I guess we were going to sum it up in a sentence. It's HBK before HBK. I mean, it doesn't even have the super kick as a finisher yet. Here it was the teardrop suplex. That was never going to work. The ending of the bout is another great window into what they are going to be able to do down the line, though, because Shawn hurls himself at Bret as Hart moves at the last minute, meaning Michaels' manager, the sensational Sherry, gets wiped out instead. Now, none of this, of course, is going to get anywhere near what they're capable of, but it's all part of that damn seed. These two are figuring it out, and they're figuring it out together. July 20th seems an all-star tag team match if it was 2025 Dynamite, because Bret and Randy Savage take on Ric Flair and Shawn Michaels. And think of everything that was going to follow this down the line. It's like they knew, even though that's impossible. The main reason for existing too is to promote Flair and Randy, who were going to fight at SummerSlam after that awesome WrestleMania match. I think the whole time Shawn Michaels just studies Rick, but it's totally great. All of a sudden he opens up his more flamboyant side, and once again all the pieces are falling into place. It's not at the level he is going to get, but you can tell. You see it forming even more on July 21st, and that's a date you need to store in your brain, because this is the first ever WWF ladder match when Bret defends his IC title against Shawn. And because this is essentially testing the stipulation, it doesn't happen on pay-per-view. Instead, it gets released on the wonderfully named VHS home release, stack 'em and whack 'em. The issue is that Vince McMahon, in a very rare moment, is not present at this show, so he has no idea of the final details, or that Bret Hart had got this concept from Stampede Wrestling. I mean, it worked there, why can't it work here? They don't even touch the damn ladder for the first 2/3 of the thing, and given this is a Bret Hart ladder match, the use of it is savvy. I mean, Shawn does drive it into Hart's tum-tum at one point, and then they whip the other person into it, and yep, of course the crowd gasp. They've never seen anything like this in their life. A ladder is meant to be climbed, not be used as a weapon. It's also sold as a necessary evil as opposed to what it is today, which is basically a gun. And that was always going to happen because wrestling has to evolve, but it is fascinating here, mostly due to the fact that sure, the ladder is used for violence, but that's only to then create space so you can climb it and get the belt. Therefore, when Michaels scrambles up there and Bret stops him by grabbing his tights and throwing him to the floor, again, there is a stunned reaction. This is woefully different. Bret does this towards the end again, and this time Shawn goes right into the rope's crotch first, and keep that in your brain. When of course the Hitman climbs it rung by damn rung, and there's no going back, he is the champion, although it is going to lead to some bitterness down the line. Because of course these days it's Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 10 that are synonymous with this. They took all the plaudits. Although it's important to note that at this time there is no rivalry between Bret and Shawn, other than a competitive one. They want to be the best. At the same time though, I bet if you had a conversation with Bret Hart, he would agree that maybe there is a tendency for Vince McMahon to be more enamored with Shawn than he is the Hitman. I mean, very soon, Michaels would be getting preferential treatment as the top guy. The 1992 Survivor Series brings more of this, and what a switch. Hart was now the world champion after a shock decision was made during a WWF house show tour, where Bret Hart did indeed defeat Rick. He was going back to WCW. It's likely why Vince books Bret versus Shawn, because now we've got the Heartbreak Kid, and he's so cocky, such a wonderful asshole, and given that Bret Hart is the goody good guy, well that's perfect, sometimes you want to keep it simple. Just to get super nerdy too, the Wrestling Observer newsletter rates it at 4.5 stars. Once again, it really does stand out here for a WWF match, mostly because the rest of the roster wasn't doing its kind of style. And sure, yes, it's way too long at 27 minutes just due to the fact that the WWF fan was not conditioned to this, and they go quiet, but it's clear there's something to it all, and if nothing else, Bret and Shawn appear to genuinely enjoy working with each other. I mean, it's certainly not one of those matches you should go out of your way to see today and feel like it could work in a modern environment. I don't mean that disparagingly either, it's just because the pair would take all of this and reach a whole nother level instead. Those are the bouts that you should seek out, so this one is mostly there for historical purposes. I mean, they know what they're doing, and more importantly, they know what they want to do. On the 20th of November 1993, they do it again, and this time it's at the Survivor Series. As it has been so long, Bret has now lost the WWE title, and Lex Luger is now Hulk Hogan. Or something. Shawn has also found his way to the IC belt, which more than likely meant that one day he was going to be the world champion, but the point is they are both still involved. Nobody can look at either of them and call them juice heads either, which yes, was a favourite word at the time. And even though we are not talking about Hogan levels from a box office point of view, in fact the business was struggling a little bit, if you were a wrestling purist, this is your time. The in-ring is most definitely better. Michaels spends a lot of this year feuding with Jannetty, Tatanka and Mr. Perfect until we get to the pay-per-view, and bam, it is Hart versus Michaels, the issue being this isn't what we wanted it to be. And there's a reason Shawn's Survivor Series team is called the Knights, and that is because Jerry Lawler, who was feuding with Bret Hart, was meant to be the captain when he missed the show after some quite serious accusations. Terry Funk was also going to be added in to bolster this, but he wasn't able to make it either, so the WWF pretends that Shawn has been insulting the Hart family for months. It's just not true. It's just thrown together at the last minute, and while the Bret-Owen interactions are compelling, it's not all that good, nor did it really have a chance to be. Things keep on ticking on the 1st of December 1993 as Bret defeats Shawn in a steel cage match on Superstars. It sort of feels like this is a test run for Owen versus Bret, but Michaels is just going off here. I mean, he throws himself into the steel like it's not an issue, and if the WWE didn't have a bloodbath then, you just know he would have spilled the red stuff. Hart still drags Shawn Michaels back into the ring by his hair when he tries to escape the cage, and the finish works with the stipulation. Michaels gets his leg caught in the old school blue bars, and yes, that happens in the Hart vs. Hart SummerSlam 1994 match too. Who knew? WrestleMania 10 is our next stop, and do not forget, at the time, fans called this the best show in WWF history. Bret wins the world title back at the end, which is just a lovely jubbly moment, but of course, due to losing the opener to Brother Owen, well now we have the Brothers at War. It is a very well thought out story. I mean, the whole time Owen is cheating so much that Bret eventually loses his mind with his younger sibling. And then we move on to Shawn, and of course he faces Razor Ramon in that aforementioned ladder match, and he completely changes the game forevermore. In the next Wrestling Observer newsletter, Michaels is even described as having one of the very best individual showings in wrestling history, and you cannot just say something like that. There has to be evidence to back it up. And yes, the finish is Shawn being hurled crotch first onto the top rope, which was the same finish he did with Bret. And I don't think he told the Hitman about that, because in Bret's book he describes this as Shawn being a thieving bastard. So there you go. July 25th, 1995 holds a secret too that few have ever talked about, and even the WWE didn't do it until it was randomly featured on the Shawn Michaels Showstopper DVD. And he and Bret Hart teamed together to face Eli and Jacob Blue. It's just done for the sake of doing it. I mean, I suppose it's a reason to tell your friends about why they should go to WWE live events. But look, once again, here's the truth. It's empty. Like, it's fine all things considered, and of course Hart and Michaels win before they share the most awkward hug ever. They then do sort of endorse the other one, but not really. Bret especially looks done with it before it begins, so what the flub was happening here? Well, the click was happening. All the backstage team of Shawn Michaels, the 1, 2, 3 Kid, Diesel, Razor Ramon, and Triple H, and of course all the stories are out there today, but anyone not part of this stable made their feelings clear. The click makes life behind the scenes harder as they ran around with political power, trying to look out for themselves and their friends. I think they even get called saboteurs by some people, and the worst part is that often Vince McMahon gives them exactly what they want. It soon feels like anybody with an upside that could even have some sort of potential gets marginalized, and when a lot of these individuals are folk that Bret Hart both liked and tried to help, well, he doesn't like the click at all. Now, the click never goes after Bret Hart directly because they're not stupid, and also, no matter what does go down, the Hitman always put his matches and the locker room first. He is very much we have to think about the show before anything else, and he even turns down a private locker room during this period. That is not his way. The essence of professional jealousy is also on show, given that Hart had been given the top babyface role, before, of course, Lex Luger was tried out instead. It then went back to Bret before Vince gave it to Shawn. You can see the tennis here. It all leads to March 31st, 1996, WrestleMania 12. We all know this is the infamous Iron Man match, which many people thought was crazy at the time. A mid-90s audience isn't going to be patient enough to sit through a 60-minute match, but that wasn't an accurate statement. This went into sudden overtime when Shawn and Bret go 0-0, meaning Michaels finally gets him with the super kick 1, 2, 3. The boyhood dream had come true. The conversation point even now is simple too. Why the flub did we not include any pin? I mean, ensuring that the scoreline never had any numbers on it just makes this feel like an extended singles match, and even if they were trying to replicate sports, well, the drama doesn't come from ties, it comes from high-scoring games, which many fans thought was going to happen here. Others, of course, defend it as they should and call it a masterpiece, because what a brave thing to do. I always think it depends on your mood. There are elements to this which are sublime, but in terms of a match you'll continually go back to, well, it's not for me. Due to the length, it just can be quite dull. That also comes down to the fact that we never really pick a lane. I mean, it's not over the top or frenzy due to the hatred between the two, and I'm not sure anybody would call it fantastically crafted today. I mean, it was totally different from 1996 in the World Wrestling Federation, and that deserves credit. I mean, all companies do have to take more risks, and hey, Bret himself often says this is his best match ever. It goes to show. It does draw a line right down the middle, and maybe there's an awkwardness because of their relationship at the time. I mean, only you can decide that by going to watch it, but we are going to get deeper. Because Bret Hart is totally fine with losing. He's about to go on hiatus and enter a free agency, and given that WCW was on the way back up, he assumes a bidding war is going to start. That means more money. What the Hitman doesn't like, though, is the build to WrestleMania 12. Shawn also feels the same because the boyhood dream arc feels like something the WWF would have done 10 years ago. And then there's his real-life trainer, Jose Lothario, who is in his corner. I mean, there was a connection at the time, but Shawn Michaels feels this makes him a little bit less cool. And also Bret watches all the training footage and goes, Vince McMahon, are you sneakily pitching to make me look like an old guy on his way out? Which is not helped when we get to the end of the Iron Man match, and Shawn Michaels at quite some volume tells referee Earl Hebner to pass on a message to Bret, get the fuck out of my ring. Now this is not cool, and it would be like Hulk Hogan informing Andre the Giant to piss off after WrestleMania 3. I mean, if nothing else, Bret thinks this is massively ungrateful on another level, I think their relationship is starting to break down. Now, Hart does leave and soon gets a phone call from Shawn thanking him for the match, but Bret has already made up his mind. That is most definitely a Vince McMahon call and not something that was done out of respect. 6 weeks later, we get the curtain call. That is May 19th, 1996, and in case you don't know, it was the talk of the town for decades. During the main event of a Madison Square Garden house show, though, Shawn Michaels, a babyface, and Diesel, a heel, compete in a steel cage match. Then at some point, Triple H, a heel, and Razor Ramon, a babyface, get in the ring too, and all of them hug. This is because Diesel and Razor Ramon are off to WCW, which also means this is the end of the clique. So therefore, in a show of solidarity, they break kayfabe, and look, nobody at this point thinks wrestling is legit. Even in the 1950s, most people were aware, but the joy was in muddying the waters so we could all suspend our disbelief. This is not what we were doing here, because it was outwardly being said during a show, this is all a work, to use the proper terms. I mean, there's no real hate, and in terms of an operation the size of the WWF, it's the first time it's ever happened, so obviously smack bang in front of the fans. Now, Hart is still on his holidays, but he makes it clear he thinks this is terrible, coupled with the fact that Shawn himself is struggling personally. His substance issues are out of control according to some, and Bret doesn't enjoy this either. He had always presented himself as a champion, whereas now, well, Michaels is the guy, but he is rumoredly being chauffeured around by referee Tim White because he can't take care of himself. Hart also writes in his book that he once knew Shawn as somebody who respected the business and the fans, but that person seems to have vanished, whereas demands of the locker room just fly in the face of how Bret sees things. Calling them at odds wouldn't be the half of it. On October 28th, Bret signs a brand new deal with the WWF, turning down a massive offer from WCW. They were willing to spend $3 million a year, which was huge at the time, but Bret Hart makes it very clear he feels loyal to Vince McMahon, while also not trusting Hulk Hogan in WCW. I mean, that may be a viable option these days because the numbers are up. Hulk Hogan got a Hulk Hogan, and Bret don't want none of Hulk Hogan. Got that one right, didn't he? The contract has been talked about to death because technically it's the first step of the Montreal Screwjob. An unprecedented 20-year deal. The first 3 will cover Bret Hart as a performer, before the rest will see Bret get involved in creative. It's basically a lifetime contract where eventually he will become the new Pat Patterson. The Raw where Bret Hart announced this is awesome because Bret took this idea and he didn't like the microphone and threw it out the window. Every single word he says sounds like the realest thing you've ever heard, and you get the iconic line from Vince McMahon on commentary. All right. If you know what I'm talking about, well, you know. November 20th, 1996 sees the Royal Rumble press conference roll into San Antonio, Texas, where Bret does indeed feel a bit like a third wheel. He had been a stopgap for the then WWE champion Sid Justice to beat before Shawn goes on to win it back in January. And look, HBK at this point was the man in the ring, and he was for most of 1996, having bangers with Mankind and raising the bar. It didn't help business, which feels more like a global wrestling program. And then there are those personal issues again. They were not getting better. It leaves Bret wondering whether he has made the right decision, but hey, McMahon has told him the plan. The big Shawn rematch at WrestleMania 13. Why not? At least he can get his title back. Not quite. Because on February 2nd, 1997 is another date people talk about all the time. The WWF is now doing a very old school house show loop where 3 shows are running in the same day. Bret is tasked with doing all of them, with the last but one being against Steve Austin. Now, given the travel schedule, he makes the road agents know very clearly he's going to be late. It's not going to be by choice. He just can't get there any earlier. He then arrives and finds Steve Austin, who tells him, listen, my friend, Triple H and Shawn Michaels are talking shit about you. Ruh-roh. This time it was questioning Bret Hart's professionalism, and that's an area Bret Hart takes great pride in. It still creates enough noise that Bret agrees to put Triple H over as a make good too, Vince. And apparently after this match, Hunter calls Bret's work lackadaisical. It was like a pressure cooker ready to explode. It also doesn't help that McMahon himself is desperately trying to do anything to combat World Championship Wrestling, including trialing triple threat matches on house shows. I mean, how silly does that sound today? On January 31st, Hart also loses a one-on-one against Shawn instead, which doesn't bode well for his current status. Top guys don't get beaten that easy on house shows. It takes another shift that night when McMahon finds Hart and tells him the original plan of him versus Shawn round 2 at WrestleMania. Well, it's a little bit too obvious. Instead, it's going to be a hair versus hair ladder match. And look, Shawn was still going to lose that, which is fine. But surprise, surprise, Bret doesn't believe this at all. He thinks it all comes down to Michaels not wanting to take the 1, 2, 3. Now, it's fair to point out that even at this stage, Hart is still hopeful that the WWF operates as a meritocracy, and while that would be great, that's not what drawing. What does is Michaels and Triple H's idea for a more edgy adult product, so the competing visions are back, and it's not one Bret is going to win. And then, yes, we get to February, and Shawn Michaels loses his smile. It was on a live episode of Raw when a stubbled Michaels came to the ring to say he was giving up the world title due to a wounded knee. He's also lost his smile, and there's nothing he can do. And Bret calls BS on this instantly. I mean, how did Shawn work a match 3 days before this, and the Wrestling Observer newsletter even weighs in? The injury is most definitely real, but the severity of it may not be. I mean, if this was 2025, I think Michaels would have been right to do this, but given where he was in the late 90s and the amount of people who felt sabotaged by him, well, he was sort of asking for it. It meant Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels for WrestleMania 13 was now next to impossible. And actually, thank goodness for that in hindsight, a submission match is made instead, basically from nowhere, between the Hitman and Stone Cold Steve Austin. And it remains one of the best matches of all time. So that is pretty good. It's also important to note that Michaels is back pretty quickly after WrestleMania, when we get a right doozy, Raw, March 24th, 1997, and post-double turn, Hart decides to focus his attention on the crowd and tell them that the USA sucks. It really is the start of Vince McMahon's passe good guys versus bad guys speech, even though he hasn't said it yet, because Bret decides he is going to be a babyface in Canada, but a heel in the United States. Was quite the challenge. It is, of course, Shawn who interrupts here, and good grief. He is on a tear as he calls Bret Mark Man, and that he really thinks that all of this is his. I mean, if Vince Russo had got a hold of this, I bet he would have told Shawn to just walked out there and gone, ha, wrestling is fake, bros. But it could actually tie into this Bret Hart 20-year contract, because that said for 2 decades, sure, you are going to be the guy. And all of a sudden we get some awful innuendo. Because Michaels ponders how Bret knows Shawn posed for Playgirl, and it is essentially homophobia. There's no place for it then, ever stop it, go outside. It gets the Hart who attacks Shawn's legs and wraps it around the ring post figure 4 style, and man did he make that thing in 1997. I'm not sure anybody has ever done it more badass since. The nerds among us also have a very specific question. Why the flub is this build better than the one for WrestleMania 12? Why indeed? April 7, 1997 is really when it all does start to go off the rails, because Shawn turns up to work and is seemingly ready for war and basically cuts a shoot promo live on Monday Night Raw. I mean, with the idea of the Attitude Era firmly in view, Shawn outwardly states he thinks Bret Hart doesn't like putting him over, and that he doesn't like that he has to play second fiddle to the Hitman for years. He even calls him a money-desperate mercenary, and you can't spin that. Gets worse too, he accuses Hart of burying other talent and doing all that he can do to undermine Shawn's run as a top guy. I mean, tell us how you really feel. The big shot seems to be when HBK also says Hart can't draw a dime, and in a predetermined business, something just feels off about the whole thing. I mean, you can say it makes for great TV, and fans couldn't believe it, but Bret obviously is insulted all over the shop. Nobody had cleared this with him, and he feels like it's uncalled for. At the same time, from Shawn's point of view, he thinks Bret is doing his best to keep wrestling in the so-called dark ages and get in the way of his degenerate solution. To say they were at odds is like saying, I've lost a little bit of hair. Come on. Michaels also doesn't understand why we have to live in Hart's world. Kevin Nash actually has said something similar to this, because when he and Bret were planning a match for the 1996 Royal Rumble, or so it is claimed, when Bret spoke up about concerns of how he was being portrayed, Nash simply replied, "It's not all about you, motherfucker." Quite. Bret also took umbrage over Michaels' drawing comments, because it's not like he turned the ship around either, and all of a sudden you get paranoia from all sides. They just don't trust each other, and they continually undermine each other, and eventually all of it just emptied itself on live TV. I think eventually Bret felt like it was doomed if it did continue, so he does reach out to Shawn on April 21st, 1997. It is said to be a particularly charged conversation, with Michaels even telling Hart that locker room morale was better when he was gone. After some more chatting, Shawn also admits that enraged promo I did do on Raw was off the back of you not believing me about my legitimate injury. As luck would have it, Bret Hart was dealing with his own knee issue at the time, although still had a great match with Austin at In Your House Revenge of the Taker. With some trepidation, it feels like Bret accepts there's no way to know for sure, and the two shake hands in order to work professionally at the King of the Ring. That match then never happens, if only it had. By May 12th, Bret is a full-on heel and even has his own group in the Hart Foundation. And even though he has had knee surgery, he's still on TV and even has himself wheeled around in a wheelchair. It's as old school as they come, and also apparently something Bret felt like he needed to do. The WWF had decided to bring back Jim Neidhart, and if the stable doesn't get born, well, there's no knowing if that deal actually gets done. Now, at this point, the King of the Ring match we just talked about is still on the card, so Bret calls out Shawn. And the idea is that Bret is going to tear into Michaels to the point when HBK super kicks him at the end of the segment. It's totally justified, and Bret Hart can fall back into his wheelchair. That's a great visual, but nobody at home sees this because Bret Hart misses his cue and Raw essentially just stops mid-rant. Shawn is furious by this, and even though Bret is adamant that it was a mistake, Michaels has made up his mind. This hitman is a mark for himself, and all this nonsense about I couldn't hear my time cue over the crowd is baloney. You did this to mug me off. You're going to have to watch this yourself to make the call. And yes, but the boos are pretty loud and Bret has always been the professional, but you can argue this both ways. In fact, it gets so intricate, somebody could probably make an entire Dark Side of the Ring episode just off this. But it absolutely is a catalyst. And a week later on the May 19th Raw, it gets even worse. Because yes, Shawn Michaels walked to the ring and he goes nuclear because he accuses Bret Hart in a roundabout way of having an affair with WWF valet Sonny. Now the exact line, as I'm sure you remember, is I know you've been having some sunny days lately, as he wiggles his eyebrows furiously. And yes, Bret is married and has kids at the time. And the worst part is that it's not true. To this day, even Sonny denies it, and trust me, if anybody was going to talk, it's Sonny. The main problem, though, is that the accusation as itself is believable, because as Bret Hart wrote in his book, he did sleep around on the road. Michaels also throws in that Stu Hart is dead but still walks around his house because his brain hasn't figured it out yet. And while in terms of the feud it absolutely turned up the heat, this is not what Bret wanted to do. Furthermore, he was hearing all of this in real time. Nobody had asked him. It goes off when Hart's son Dallas asks if the Sonny comment is true, and Bret is so enraged he thinks about shooting on Shawn at the pay-per-view. Before he's calmed down, that is not the right thing to do, and also, that match is not going to happen. His knee is not going to be better in time. 2 weeks later, on June 2nd, Vince McMahon sits down with Bret Hart too and tells him this new contract is not working out. The WWF is in such financial difficulties, something has to give, and it does nothing to help Bret, who is still living with Shawn, and then at the June 9th Raw, has to be calmed down again by Jim Neidhart. Now there could be more to this because Jim knows if there has to be a scapegoat in all of this, it could be him. He was absolutely a great asset to the Hart Foundation, but he could also easily be replaced. It means when Bret sees Shawn later, he just says hello, to which Michaels replies, "Go fuck yourself." Oh no. Hart then follows him and asks Shawn if there is some sort of a problem, and after telling Vince McMahon if Bret gets in his face he'll hit him, well, Shawn hits him, then Hart obviously throws one back, and they start to brawl on the floor. This is also when Bret pulls a chunk of Shawn's hair out of his head, and even other wrestlers have talked about this. That was pretty gnarly, and the only reason it is stopped is because Pat Patterson and Jerry Lawler see all of this, and yes, they get involved. Shawn then apparently instantly quits, and if it wasn't for a desperate plea by Vince McMahon, would probably be at WCW at the end of the year as the champion. Now listen, I'm exaggerating of course, because he was locked into a WWF contract, but apparently that was his threat. It also meant now there was more tension than ever, although that gets interesting on August 3rd at SummerSlam, because there is footage out there of Shawn playing with Bret's sons Dallas. So it just goes to show that Shawn Michaels is not a monster or anything like that, and it is key to point it out. I mean, maybe things are smoothed over a little bit. It's actually quite a heartwarming moment. You also see Bret and The Undertaker in the foreground planning their match, because later on Shawn is going to be the special guest referee, and he's going to waffle Taker right in the head with a steel chair, allowing Bret Hart to become the WWF champion for a then record 5th time. And I tell you, this is one of my favorite ever pay-per-views. The opening video line alone, life isn't fair. Every time. The addition of Shawn too really works by now also, because the New Jersey fan base is well aware of the deal. These two hate each other, both in front of and behind the cameras, so there's every chance that it could actually get worse on pay-per-view. To be fair to the WWF as well, it makes for compelling TV, because you have Shawn as the authority figure telling Bret what to do, and Bret turning around and telling him to flub off. Suspend your disbelief, fiction and reality are one. We also get a classic bit where Michaels starts to fight off the Hart Foundation as if he is the hero, which means, yes, he misses the fact that The Undertaker has the match won. So the dead man is pissed off with him too, and he grabs Shawn by his lapels. You also get an accidental coming together between Bret and Shawn to add to all of this, and it is Hart who does get the chair, and he whams it into the dead man's head. Now listen, that only gets a 1-2-ooh, but when HBK notices the weapon, well, he's mad. And he tells Bret, I'm gonna DQ you. So of course Hart spits in his face, which was disgusting. Seconds later, Shawn has swung that chair, totally missed, collided with the Phenom, and is forced to count the 1-2-3. And fair play to Shawn Michaels as well, he sells this brilliantly. He genuinely can't believe it, and the timing is superb. There's even more rumours after the fact though, because apparently Bret had told Shawn, I will spit on your chest. And this one most definitely got him in the eye. Although very curiously after this, it does all settle down a bit. Like, they're not sending Christmas cards to each other or anything, and Hart is beside himself at the antics Shawn is doing on live TV, but they do seem to get to a middle ground. I mean, there's no trust, but at least they're not punching each other. Could also be due to the fact that Vince McMahon at this point had told Hart he will handle Shawn, while also telling Michaels it's all Bret's fault. Trust me, he knew what he was doing. It did help with the SummerSlam 1997 main event, which was a creative injection the WWF hadn't had for a while, and Hart, yes, as we've talked about, is now the champion. That's always going to help with his fears. But then there's that other issue, the contract McMahon wants to figure out. Whatever shall we do? September 20th is a night dear to my heart because it is one night only in the UK. I'm so young, I was genuinely scared that fans were going to boo Bret because he was my guy. And mean that too, I had sleepless nights. Remember, it's only the USA he hates, and when he did come to the ring and he got jeered, I was done. Little did I know that Bret Hart was going through something else entirely for different reasons. Because even though he was the WWF champion, he legitimately didn't like the direction of travel for the company. He thought the content was getting a bit too smutty. Some of that, of course, was Degeneration X, but it was also what Shawn was up to himself. Because everything in the build to One Night Only heavily suggested that the British Bulldog, Hart's brother-in-law, was going to win the then European Championship. Davey Boy Smith had even dedicated this match to his sister Tracy, who was dying from cancer. That's how far along this is. He has been told, you are winning this match, go out and sell the thing. Of course, Shawn then decides to ensure that doesn't happen, and even outside of what we have just talked about, it kills the atmosphere in the building. Nobody wanted to see Davey Boy Smith lose. There was also the issue of how Michaels was going to lose this in December, a couple of months after this, because him and Triple H have a joke match. I mean this too, you can look it up. Now it is pretty funny as they totally expose wrestling in the craziest of ways, but if that was how the title was going to switch hands, just let the British Bulldog win and have his moment. I mean, you can imagine how Bret felt about all of it. 2 days later at Raw, Vince McMahon chats to Hart once again and tells him to call WCW to try and get the deal that he was offered before. This is huge. There's also the option to shift all the money to the back end of the WWE deal, which is essentially asking Bret to work for free. There's also a lot to this because McMahon doesn't release Hart, so it can feel like WCW has to work to get him. But also, months after this, not only does Mike Tyson sign for the WWF for mega money, but there's a contract you can see on the internet right now from December 1997 to the Ultimate Warrior, and let's just say that's for a lot of cash. Now, it never happens, but it's worth providing some evidence about how rocky this relationship was. I'm not sure anybody trusted anybody else. By this point, you can tell where we are from the date, October 6, 1997. We are 1 month away. The Survivor Series match is good to go, but the Bad Blood pay-per-view that comes beforehand is not headlined by Bret, the WWF champion. It's the first ever Hell in a Cell between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, and yeah, it's an absolute classic. And I ask you, dear watcher, who does Bret face on this night? If you said he teams with the Bulldog to take on Vader and the Petra in a flagpole match, well, you would be right. That is not championship material. Part 2 of the mess is that Shawn is now a mega heel and doing a great job, but Hart is also a heel too. From the TV, it also feels like Michaels is positioned above Bret, and yet Bret is the champion. Once again, don't pretend the WWF didn't have a lot in saying why this exploded. The problems were not being sorted internally, because they thought it made for good TV. It all then spills out onto Raw again as Bret goes and uses homophobic language and slurs, which, as we've already talked about, is not good or right. Doesn't make the feud any better, and the threat to take out DX is way better. That feels legit. Hart never actually does it. It's only fair to say that Bret has claimed that Shawn and Triple H wanted to lean into the sexual side of all of this, but even if true, don't pitch it, don't do it, and saying you know what the H in Triple H stands for is reductive at best. I'm pretty sure gay fans were also watching the late 90s. Their orientation shouldn't be pitched as an insult. Hart also once again goes after the Playgirl magazine and calls Hunter Shawn's boyfriend in the Calgary Sun article. There's no excuse, but there is a sense that Bret doesn't know what else to do. Choosing this path was totally incorrect. On the other side, Triple H and HBK will tell anyone and everyone that Hart just doesn't get it anymore. The death of Brian Pillman also plays a part, as awful as it is to say, because it's another emotional bullet Bret has to try and deal with. Throw in that he feels like he's way out and there's no middle ground with Shawn, and there is just a sense that he is more disgusted with what's happening around him as opposed to super angry. By this stage, he's also met with Eric Bischoff too, and with the pay-per-view match on the way, he tells Shawn, if and when it's time to put him over, no issue. Regardless of what has happened in the past, he will do it. Now really, this is the sticking point of all sticking points, and all sides have confirmed this. Michaels responds that he would not do the same for Bret Hart. It doesn't take a genius to realize why Hart from this stage on decided to dig his heels in. If Shawn isn't going to be a professional, why should he? And no way is he going to do it in Montreal. And sure, two wrongs do not make a right, that is very true. But with everything else that has happened, it was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back. But if Michaels had just lied or said nothing, I truly believe the most talked about situation in pro wrestling history never happens. It all goes mad as Bret Hart tells Vince McMahon all of this and points to the creative clause in his contract. He even pitches Steve Austin as a replacement, but as that is set for WrestleMania, this is turned down. Days after this, it's also reported that in tears, Shawn Michaels will tell Bret Hart how much he respects him and how he can say the stupidest things sometimes. But we've already been here before. Hart thinks this is Vince McMahon putting words in HBK's mouth to get this all over the line. He ain't buying it. On November 2nd, apparently Vince does actually pitch a work shoot where chaos will reign supreme, and afterwards Bret can punch him for getting involved. Now, I would take that with a grain of salt, but it is out there. The issue is, it still means Hart losing in Canada, which has become his line. He won't cross it. If Shawn has to win, he'll gladly put him over at Madison Square Garden in December. But what on earth were the WWE thinking after this, I don't know. Because on the 27th of October, the angle for the Survivor Series is to frame Bret as a racist. Never watched this, it's bad. And so is the 9th of November, the night of all nights. Bret Hart is the champion, he's going to WCW, and Hart tells story of sending the contract to Eric Bischoff with tears in his eyes. It was just a mess. This is where we get to the other point of contention, but it is important, and this gets spun all of the time. Eric Bischoff would never allow Bret Hart to turn up on Nitro with the winged eagle around his waist. And the reason? Well, a very real legal battle. Turner higher-ups were already angry with Eric for pushing things too far and having a WWF lawsuit accusing WCW of tampering with its IP. This hadn't been resolved in 1997, so if Bischoff had greenlit this, not only would WCW lose millions of dollars, but he would have been fired. You can look it all up. It was all to do with how Bischoff had presented Scott Hall as basic Razor Ramon, so yeah, the WWF sued them. And given that Nitro was also way ahead of Raw at the time, there was no need to take this sort of a risk. And let's be honest, does anybody really think Bret Hart would have done this? No way. I mean, he made mistakes, but he was professional to the end, and his reputation to him was everything. In fact, the one thing he didn't want was one seismic event that would overshadow his entire career. The irony of that. Hart was even asked by Vince McMahon when he returned to the WWF months before this to rip up the WCW contract he was offered on Raw. Bret said no because that's not his style and WCW had treated him nicely. And you can still think what happens next is totally justified, such as your prerogative, but it is hard to use what we just talked about as an actual reason. Now the back and forth has become relentless, and the official finish at the time is eventually D-Generation X will interfere, but for the Hart Foundation join in too, and the whole thing is thrown out. So it's Raw in 2025. You can't say this isn't realistic either, because soon that was going to be the staple of the Attitude Era, just chaos all of the time, and the word is then Bret can simply hand over the title the next night. I always found that weird. Bret had made it clear anywhere but Montreal, and the fact that WWF didn't book one of these kind of sums it up. Also, if you had done that, that would have sucked. That's not what wrestling is. Nobody should have wanted that. Now, Bret, to his credit, I suppose, doesn't trust any of these ideas and tells referee Earl Hebner of his worries. He is so confident he wouldn't screw him over, he gets Earl to swear on his kids that he won't do anything. That would be another talking point. And with no other option, Bret agrees. We shall do the schmoz. I will throw in that Hart even agrees to drop the belt to the Brooklyn Brawler, and that Vader even takes him to one side and tells him, I wouldn't trust Earl Hebner if I were you. That's how deep this goes. Other wrestlers have caught on and they have picked up on it. Just doesn't tick the usual boxes. Now the screw job is nothing new. You can ask Wendy Richter about that. And on this occasion it seems as if two people suggested it. One is Triple H, the other is Jim Cornette. Although it's important to differentiate between the two, because as the story goes, Paul Levesque meant it in a very much, well, if he doesn't want to do business, we'll do business for him, whereas Cornette was just so tired of everybody arguing, why can't somebody grow up? So at this rate, you may as well screw him. He did not think his boss was going to take that as a legitimate idea. Now the mad part of all of this is that if you do watch Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels from the 1997 Survivor Series, it is pretty damn great. You could argue it's their best ever contest because the brawl is focused around how much they hate each other, and you can just feel the tension, and my gosh, they lay it in. It's almost sad we do not get to the ending, because we would be talking about it very differently. It rules. The switch, of course, is the planned spot where Shawn Michaels would apply the sharpshooter before Bret Hart reversed it, and that was simply meant to be a near fall of sorts. Way to transition into the second half of the match. But before Hart can do anything, Vince McMahon is here shouting, ring the bell, damn it. A piece of trivia I always like to point out is you can go and watch this and watch Bret Hart seconds before. He even tells Michaels you're putting on the sharpshooter the wrong way. So in the moment, any fears he had gone to the back of his mind. Earl Hebner quickly calls for the bell as a very confused timekeeper Mike Eaton does exactly as he has told, and almost instantly Bret Hart figures it out, and he spits right in Vince McMahon's face. As for Shawn Michaels, well, he has been told to feign ignorance, which he does do, but soon we'd know he was well aware. It is without doubt one of the lowest points for the WWF, especially from a fan's point of view. They have no clue what's happening. I mean, why would they? Bret then writes WCW in the air with his finger, which would be shown in video packages for years to come, and Earl Hebner quite literally runs into a car and flees. It's kind of mad when you think about how many angles we see on TV where the bad guys do exactly that to underline that something evil had gone down. Wife Julia then yells at Triple H, which is also captured on the Wrestling with Shadows documentary. And as for Bret, well, he tells Vince McMahon, if you don't leave this room, I'm going to punch you. He doesn't leave, so Bret punches him, and by all accounts, he knocked him out. There's also footage of Bret Hart asking Shawn Michaels if he had anything to do with this, and Michaels swears blind that he doesn't. Now, how he really feels about this, we don't know, but you would have to figure that Shawn wasn't exactly totally happy about being involved and then having to lie about it. Most other wrestlers have also said he was pretty much an emotional mess since then, even if on the next night on Raw he walks out and he's a mega asshole. As for Vince, well, you know the deal. He tries damage control by telling Jim Ross that Bret screwed Bret, and no one buys that. So he uses the whole thing to become the Mr. McMahon character that would help the World Wrestling Federation reach new heights. I mean, it really is incredible. And from there, well, there's not much to tell you. Hart's WCW run is not good. By 1998, Shawn Michaels is trying to save his career after his back gives out. It means the two are essentially away from one another until January 4th, 2010. Now I remember this like it was yesterday because I was in my first job when boom, Bret Hart returns to Raw next week. I couldn't believe it. I also laughed because this was the night when TNA decided to go head-to-head with Raw. Some things will never change. You push WWE, they'll push you back. 4 years before this, Hart had accepted an invite into the Hall of Fame, and by doing so, had stopped the WWE from releasing a DVD that was going to be called Screwed, the Bret Hart Story. Instead, it becomes a celebration of an all-time career, but it isn't until all this time afterwards when he agrees to be on TV. Why we use the then new Hart Foundation music and not the classic Bret Hart theme, I will never know, but as I stand here, it still annoys me. It all builds to a reconciliation with Shawn Michaels in the middle of the ring, and look, it's nice. Lovely even. Clearly both guys feel like this is an albatross around their neck, so why be weighed down by it anymore? It means the feud itself is going to be between Bret and Vince McMahon. Listen, I guess it's okay, but it's not really. But at least Bret gets some closure and a few stiff shots during their WrestleMania match. From here, while not mega best friends, it does kind of feel like Bret and Shawn will catch up from time to time, and this heals all wounds. Which begs the question, who won the rivalry? Well, no one. If they were fighting to see who was going to become the biggest star, Steve Austin came out on top there. It's like a WCW match from 2000. Wrestler A versus Wrestler B. Somehow Wrestler C wins. Shawn definitely moves on from it in a better fashion because, as Bret had feared, WCW had no clue. Aside from bad booking, Bret himself is unenthusiastic, and all the top creative comes in fits and spurts. I mean, the Goldberg metal plate angle, for example, still brilliant. His personal life also takes a toll because not only does Owen Hart tragically pass away in that horrible accident, but Bret is forced to retire due to concussion issues, and then he suffers a stroke. It's a horrible run. It means even if he ever wanted to come back, he can't at a level he would expect, and there's a huge reason why the Vince McMahon program isn't ideal. There's really not a lot they can do. There's also a bunch of needless extra stories thrown in there when the screw job would have been enough. But apparently someone decided that wasn't true. We need to run Bret over with a car. At the same time, HBK returns in 2002, and yep, round 2 of Shawn's career is generational. It's a stark reminder that he is one of the best to ever do it because he puts on classic after classic, and personally, he seems in a way better place after finding religion. Honestly, some of his selling, he's a master of his craft. He makes fans feel like he's only one move away from death for 8 years. The ending to each of their runs is mad too because, of course, Bret has to walk away after brain trauma, whereas Shawn gets his massive rematch with The Undertaker. I mean, round 1 of that is deemed the best WrestleMania match of all time, and do not forget all of this goes down when that Vince and Bret Hart match is happening. You couldn't make it up. I suppose we should mention, just because it counts a little bit, that is the last true match of one Shawn Michaels. After years of saying no, a mammoth Saudi Arabia payday gets him back on the ring, and on paper, this is easy. He'll team with Triple H to face Kane and The Undertaker, they're all pros. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. Calling it a mess is being nice because nothing goes right. I mean, all 4 know this too because they've talked about it, but as well as Kane's mask falling off, Triple H tears his pec. Honestly, was cursed. Shawn still looks the best out of all of them, but check out his face. He knows the deal. For whatever reason, life had just decided, no, it wasn't meant to be. I mean, if you've got a mean streak in you, it is funny. Not the injury part, that's always awful. But seeing Kane desperately search for his face, it's totally chaotic. It seemed to tie in because in 2019, the internet exploded as the legend of a lost match became reality. Bret Hart versus Tom McGee was talked about for years because apparently the Hitman did such a good job making newbie Tom look like $1 million, Vince McMahon decided, oh my gosh, I have the new Hulk Hogan. We think somebody was looking in the wrong direction. Seeing is believing though, and it wasn't until this point when it came real, because pro wrestling photographer Mary Kate Anthony finds the tape. Within the space of days, Hart is being lauded by the online community, while Michaels is being told coming out of retirement was a bad idea. I swear WWE just knew. The timing is insane. What it seemed to also do is reframe Bret's career and remind people that he was one of the GOATs. Wrestlers in their droves also came out and started making it clear that Hart was a legend, and that without him, they wouldn't have been in the business to begin with. Today, forget about it and forget the screw job. It's a cloud over the industry, but more people just want to talk about how everything Bret did felt flipping real. Now that's not to diminish Shawn Michaels either, who also gets the same praise, and I think that's the lasting legacy here. They were 2 generational talents who would shape in-ring wrestling forevermore, and the issue was simply that they didn't like each other in a WWF environment. I also think that Vince McMahon thought that real-life animosity was king, which is why they were left to scrap it out and break the rules. I mean, whatever could potentially get numbers back on track. The thing is, though, if they can put it behind them, so should we, so yeah. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels are 2 all-timers, and no Hall of Fame is legit unless they are in it. I can't even imagine what wrestling would be today without them. They were 2 heroes that collided heads at the wrong time. At least it gave us quite the story to tell. I mean, you really can just pick any single one of their matches for the past 35 years and you will be impressed. So it's a salute to those guys. Let's go back to the start of the video. One of the best feuds of all time. Now, of course, please do drop me a comment below and let me know what you thought about all of this. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Click the video on the screen for another Timelines video. And apologize for the way I'm dressed in the sweat, which is disgusting. There's a heat wave in the UK. Take care, my friends. See you soon.